Good evening, everybody. So this is Prospector Jess, sourdoughminer.com, huntingforgold.com. We're here to talk tonight about finding gold on bedrock. It came up in the discussion we had about systematic prospecting last week. There were several questions about bedrock, and maybe could I show an example or two about what's going on there. So I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about what is bedrock and why it's so important to finding gold, because it is. Trust me. So when I told you last week, I said, there's kind of three sayings, three pillars, really strong pillars of finding placer gold. Go to bedrock, and go to false bedrock. And I repeat that because it's worthy of note. The problem is that people tend to not go to bedrock because, one, it's kind of hard to if there's a lot of overburden, and two, what does bedrock look like? So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what is a bedrock and what's not. And that way you'll have a better idea of what you're looking for. So in this picture right here, my wife and my son are prospecting. This is our MD20. We're looking at some samples we pulled out from behind this boulder. You can see me, I'm standing on the boulder. This picture on the bottom gives you a scale image of the boulder. And there's a pick, it's a small, small, it's about maybe a yard long est-wing rock pick for scale. So this is a pretty big piece of rock. Pried us, it took us a while to pry it out. Now the reason we went to it is that technically this is a piece of bedrock, but it wasn't really bedrock because it was resting on top of. In other words, it had fractured away from the greenstones around it. This is serpentinite, and it basically is really weak material, fractures like crazy, especially in the presence of things like cottonwoods. And so what happens is this thing had broken away and had collected. This is on the inside edge of the inside edge of a bend. This year, these storms flooded this area. So in the time that we looked at this one, it had just done that about 5-6 years ago. And so what we're looking at here is a picture of when you look at bedrock, you may see the material that's native to bedrock, but if it's broken away and lifted up and there's material underneath, like you can see here, there's debris, mud, silt, clay, sand, and gravels. That tells you that you're really not at bedrock yet. But this is the kind of material that the local bedrock is made out of. And so what we were doing was prying that material away to get down below so we could get to a piece of solid bedrock that had cracks in it, but nothing really displaced in recent history. And that would be a good place for a gold trap. So we were looking at the material that was down in the cracks and running our detector over it to find out which areas and which pockets were the most promising to dig out and run through our sluice. So that's the basic principle. Now, why is this of interest? Well, because this is ultramafic bedrock. There's also another kind of bedrock that you'll commonly encounter, and that's more of granitic type. Let me show you a really big chart, so bear with me. But this is a different view of the different kinds of material that go into making bedrocks. So typically you're going to find volcanic bedrocks and plutonic bedrocks. Volcanic simply means it extruded out above the ground, and plutonic means it intruded into the ground but never made it quite to the surface and then got eroded free. So when it comes out the top and goes out as a bunch of volcanic ash and a bunch of volcanic bombs and that kind of stuff, it's rhyolite. Okay, if it's underneath, it'll form granite. The material that rhyolite and granite consist of is over here. If in this chart, the way you figure it out is, we have percentage of silicon dioxide, silicon dioxide, which is silica or quartz. Okay, so how much of the rock consists of quartz? Well, 70% to 65%. And then we have these various quartz and feldspars. These are lighter colored material, typically rosy or white in their coloring, and very low in some of these heavy, dense minerals, okay, such as amphibole and muscovite and so forth. But there's a bit of it. And so what's going to happen is this determines the rock you're dealing with. If you go clear over on the other side, you have a thing called peridotite. That's almost pure olivine. You find that stuff in the ridges on the ocean floor or in a really serious basaltic lava flow like you see in Hawaii. And so what you're looking at here is kind of the two extremes. Over on this far side here is ultramafic. So right here, this is all ultramafics, and this is what we call sialic, or basically, heavy on quartz. The difference between the two from the naked eye is mostly the ultramafics are dense, heavy, dark. The sialics are light, and they're not by any means not heavy, but they're lighter per pound than the minerals you'll see, and they're lighter in color. So instead of seeing something like this, which is a piece of magnetite, you'll see something more like this, or even lighter. I'm trying to find one here. So, but the basic principle, you've seen granite countertops, gray, kind of white colored, that kind of thing. So what you're looking for is those two extremes. Either one of them can form bedrock, and anything in between. The problem is that the two bedrocks that go the most are actually the two extreme ones. You'll typically find a fair amount of placer gold in regions with granite if there is intrusive bodies into the granite that released gold. On the other hand, ultramafic bodies tend to go with sulfides and other iron-based minerals because that's kind of where they come from. And they tend to have a lot of these mineralizations such as gold, platinum, silver, lead, zinc, etc. associated with them. And so what we're playing with here is kind of, how do I know which rock I'm looking at? And so I just wanted to kind of bring your attention back to that. The idea of bedrock isn't so much what does it consist of as what kind of a basement is it. Does the gold go down and sink to the bottom and stick? If it does, then that is going to become the place where gold settles, because it will go as low as it can go in any kind of turbulent material until that slurry settles down, and then it's going to drop. The only reason it would go further downstream is because it's been flattened and formed little thin airfoils that can affect its ability to sink quickly and get stirred back up again. It's kind of like an airfoil, an airplane wing, something like that, or a piece of paper. It might have a total amount of weight like a big tree, but in a thin piece, it's just going to fly. And that's the case of gold too. They can get very, very thin pieces when it gets smashed down super thin by all the boulders around it. So this is the kind of thing we're looking at. The other thing I wanted to bring your attention to here is, with this bedrock, you're looking vertical is kind of not that way. Stop. Vertical, let's try that again. So vertical kind of goes up here like, let's see, that isn't working either. Try this again. There we go. So vertical kind of goes up like this. Now you'll notice that means that this slope, which is bedrock, is not going straight down. It's kind of sloping down underneath here and continues on down this direction. That answers that question that was asked also around the same time last week, which was, how do I know what angle or how deep to go to find the lode that's, to find bedrock when I'm taking off this overburden? And the answer is, well, in this case, it's pretty steep, this slope. And so you'll want to do, because this is on the inside edge of the bend, you're going to want to be somewhere in this vicinity anyway, over on that edge, because it's going to go down deep pretty quickly. Now, if it continues to go down deep, the gold will roll downhill. So it's going to be further down, and it's going to go as low as it can go to concentrate as much as possible. Any gold that you'd find typically in an area like this would end up being something a little more, kind of flower gold, little spotty specks. It doesn't show up very well. Little specks of gold that might be underneath these boulders or something like that. But if we're looking for the big stuff, it's going to find its way down as low as it can go down here somewhere. We know that because we know the nature of gold is to drop out as soon as it can when water flood recedes. So as soon as the current drops, the friction and the mass will essentially be overcome, and the gold will go down. It'll just sink and stick to the bottom, and then that's the end of it, until a big flood comes along that's long enough and strong enough to unseat that gold and start it into motion again. The gold will tend to want to stick. Once it sticks, it will want to stay there, and things will collect around it to make it stay even longer, like clay or other rocks and pebbles that are heavy, more gold even. So that's kind of the picture here. I just wanted to bring that up because we had that question come up about finding gold on bedrock, and I just wanted to answer that real quick. So any questions about gold on bedrock? Let's touch bases with you real quick. Feel like Captain Kirk and his communicator. Beam me up, Scotty. Oh, stop it. Let's see. We have live now, 18 of you. 977 people have been reached. Come on, guys. Join us. We're right here. Prospecting in cyberspace. So let's see, we got 10 comments already. Michael's on. Brad Stevens on. Good evening, PJ. Good evening. CJ, good evening. Hey, Charles, I have some granite and it has gold inside but haven't crushed it yet. Okay, so before you crush any of these rocks, when you see them and they have gold inside of it, it's visible gold, not fine gold disseminated throughout the rock. It may have more value if you were to etch the rock apart and pull the gold crystals out. That's only in the case where you have a nice band of gold running through it, a stringer, if you will, something visible. And the reason is that a nice piece of crystalline gold can fetch multiples of your spot price, whereas multiples are, 2 to 3 times depending upon how big a piece it is and how pretty it is to the right collector. And that's an interesting point. If you go and smush it up in a rock crusher, it's worth spot price or less. Typically, depending upon the quality of the gold and where you found it, it could be 20% less than spot. So at $1,300 an ounce, you take off 20%. Whereas if it's multiples of spot, even though it may be 20% less gold because it's got electrum, okay, it's still gorgeous, and to a collector, it might fetch a pretty good chunk of money. So be aware of that before you go crushing it. Where did all the gold come from in Arizona? Ancient mountains. Good question. But it is the erosional deposition of ancient mountain ranges that have since been eroded into those massive alluvial plains. It's also the byproduct of a lot of hydrothermal venting and crushing as the Pacific plate crushes the continental crust between between the Pacific coast and the Rocky Mountains. All of that Horst and Graben I've talked about a month ago is going to give you this fantastic opportunity to inject more gold into the surface material, and then it erodes out into the desert, and that's where you find those things. Let's see. Matthew says, I have an opportunity to work in an area with a lot of bedrock, but it looks like giant slick plates. So giant slick plates is kind of a void, but that doesn't mean there isn't gold there. It means the gold probably went somewhere else in a storm, because that's what's going to move the gold. And the question is, where did it first slow down? Where do you see gravel and particularly rapids and riffles forming? Because those areas will tend to be where the gold first drops out, and the bigger gold will drop out early. The finer golds will drop out further and further downstream. So you just want to be aware that if you're looking for bedrock, that's the stopping point vertically. If you're looking for where it lies on bedrock, go to where it drops speed. Those two axes, speed versus depth. Good question. Charles says, thanks for the information. Good, glad to, Charles. Okay, so let's see, any good rivers to hit in southeast Washington? We talked about southeast Washington in the Washington series. Go look it up. There was a post we did on gold in Washington. And what you're going to look for is, here's the trick. You're going to look for the gold location using government gold maps, that GGM thing. I'll show you how to do that in that you'll find it. There's a link to it in one of these posts. Not in this one. This one talks about 2020, which is how to look at these things and see where gold will move. So when we talked about where it would stop, 2020 prospecting, this thing right here, that basically describes this thing. that describes how water moves gold, and that's of interest when it comes to where is it going to stop horizontally in a field of boulders or in some sediments that form on bedrock. Now, back to the question, which was Southeast Washington. Look up the post we did on Southeast Washington, and then remember, gold rolls downhill, downstream, down to bedrock. That's the tour it's going to take. Merle Mitchell says, have you done a video on where to find gold in New Mexico? I've looked but not found one. There is one. It's a short. It's mostly covering southwestern New Mexico, largely because that's where most of the gold is, and there's a whole discussion in Utah's description about why that exists, why there's a kind of a drought to the northeast. There is gold up there, but it's just not as prevalent as it is to the southwest. And it goes back to that Horston Graben thing we talked about. So look up gold in New Mexico, do a search on the Hunting for Gold Facebook page, or go to Prospector Jess on YouTube and subscribe, and then look up gold in New Mexico, and you'll find it. It's there. Lots of people are finding it. So let's see. I'm between Sacramento and Chico. Rhonda says, where should I go to find and pan? I've yet to find anything larger than a flake. Well, the key about Sacramento and Chico, lots of gold, head toward the mountains. So what you're going to want to do is go, upper reaches of the Feather River, find some public prospecting areas you can pan, or anywhere along in almost any one of the rivers and tributaries coming down into the Central Valley. If you get out into the valley, the further you get out, like towards Sacramento itself, the less gold you're going to find. You'll just find little tiny flakes. But if you go on up closer to the Sierras, or go along Route 49, you're going to find gold. And the trick is to kind of follow the thing it talks about in 2020 prospecting. That shows you kind of where gold settles out. Look at the government gold maps, the sourdoughminer.com/GGM, and you can find more about where gold settles out there. Both of those, the first link is right there down below, sourdoughminer.com/2020, 20-20, and that will help you. Bear River Coal Flax, says Matthew. Yep, there you go. So there's no end of gold, gold, as far as the eye can see, and that's that started all around that area, in the American River. So you just go look up that way, head east out of Sacramento. Good questions, great questions tonight. Good to see you guys. Does anybody have any tales to tell about what they found so far this year? We had a great weekend this last weekend. It was fantastic weather. A little on the warm side, but I noticed a lot of the guys unleashed up in the a lot of the folks went up the East San Gabriel River area and had a great time up at the East Fork. And so I saw lots of pictures there, which only a week or two ago were flooding. I mean, just mad floods. So they were going nutso looking for, because now it's going to take a while to uncover all that overburden that laid down on top of where they used to be prospecting, but put a whole bunch of new nuggets down below that. So they're going to start all over again. Oh, sad. Not. So, thanks, you're awesome. Okay, glad we could help you. That's great. So I think that's probably it for tonight. I just wanted to touch bases on why go to bedrock and kind of the gist of it. And as I said, there's these two extremes. There's this, quartz-based stuff over here, and then there's this ultramafic over here. And, ultramafic means it's full of magnesium and ferric, or iron. And so the way you tell those things is it looks, typically very dark minerals and extremely dense. Whoops. Ouch. And they're heavy, and this one's magnetic. So when you find those kinds of things, and they typically have a streak that's either dark, blackish, or reddish, depending upon what it is. Pyrites will be black. Those magnetites and things like that will tend to be reddish, even though hematites and stuff like that. And that's just kind of how they, how they pan out, so to speak. And let's see, I found nothing yet, but still hoping. Sometimes still fun, though. You bet it is. And that's really part of the adventure we're on here, is just keep going. It's fun to get outdoors and try. It's funner when you start finding, sure, but don't lose heart by any means. And what you're going to start looking for to begin with is these darker minerals. Things like this magnetite and hematite go along with gold, and you'll find them first. You won't find the gold as fast as you'll find little tiny specks of black sands. If you take a magnet underneath your pan, you'll find they're drawn to it like crazy. And so that stuff can actually contain gold captured in the crystal structure, because a lot of these minerals have gold running through them. You just can't see it. It's microscopic. And there's a whole process for removing it and roasting and all that, and we won't go into that here right now, but it is a way that people have recovered fair amounts of gold. So just be aware of it. Rhonda has another question. Hold it. Okay, so yes, question above from Rhonda about field trips. We're looking into something. I would like to know what you're interested in, because one of the things that we do, is try to figure out how we can help you, but we have such a broad base, it's throughout the world, that it's a little difficult to, kind of do things together, but it would be a lot of fun to do that. The question is, what would you want to do, and, would it be worth doing? Can you learn enough from it, and can we do it together, that kind of thing. So let's see what we got. Matthew's already chiming in with Rhonda. Great. So give her some help. Yuba River, another large cobble accumulates in the middle of the river. Is that a good place? Accumulations in the middle of a river can be very good on the leading edge and the trailing edge, depending on what and how deep that accumulation is gone. It's not unusual for you to get a nice big chunk of material to gather in the center of the river. The question is it an old inner bend that was cut off by a change in the flow? Let me draw this. So if we had an inside edge of the curve, which is the typical place because of, and you'll read about that in 2020 in helical flow, but basically the gold gets swept to the inside here. Now, at some point in the future, this can all be cut off, and the river changes course because of floods like we had this year, and this will become a nice high and dry island and eventually erode into this nice little sandbar down the middle, gravel and sandbar. All the gold that collected under here is still under here. So basically what you're looking for is any hint that that's what happened, then I would go along this region first and this region way later. And the reason is the gold got trapped here from ancient history. This area eroded out from underneath here, and any gold that's trapped on the inside of here is more recent than the collection that's been concentrating over the centuries over on this edge. That's just a little thing. Now, it doesn't mean you won't find gold there, and it doesn't mean this whole thing isn't a brand new. So you have to look and see if the stuff on top is just gravels and sands, and you dig down and you find bedrock down below and it's still very loose and not compacted and not clay, chances are pretty good the gold has moved on. It's downstream. But if it starts to get to where it's pretty hard to get through, and it's got this, really old, black sand kind of concentration to it, then yeah, that's where I'd look, is right in here. But only if it had those features. If it's just kind of cobbles and rocks from the latest storm, you won't find any gold there, because that lifted this up, and this was all suspended, and all the gold, I'm going to paint it in a different color here, all the gold just kind of went underneath that and shot downstream, and it's down there somewhere, not in this pile that settled out later in the storm. So that's just worth keeping an eye out. Hey Scotty, welcome Idaho, good to see you guys. So that's it for tonight. Good questions. Catch me tomorrow night. Catch this same bat time, same bat channel. Oh boy, are you guys old enough for that? Probably older. So I'll catch you then. Good prospecting. Prospector Jess, over and out. And like I said, check out the 2020. We got that available still. And government gold maps, which is just simply /GGM/. And that gives you an idea of how I do the mapping out for the first level of research in the 5 stages of gold prospecting. So I will catch you later. The dogs are barking again. We've got to go deal with that. Good prospecting and good night.